Believe me, folks, if I had exercised my imagination to the wildest degree, I couldn't have created a first winner of this circumstance better fitted to have it than David.
Today, I want to be honest with you. I'll talk about my captivity, but during my captivity, I made both good and bad ethical decisions. I have one simple lesson for you for my kidnapping. It's to be honest, admit your mistakes, and take responsibility for them. As Frank showed in his amazing life, humility and honesty are the best ways to win people's admiration, not bravados and lies. In terms of journalism, it may seem to you that we live in an age where opinion and pontification is king, when mocking one's rivals, distorting their arguments, and shouting loudest gets people ahead. I promise you, though, that fairness is the best way in the long term. I promise you that Frank's approach is still the right one. I flew to Kabul, the Afghan capital, and was invited to an interview an hour outside of Kabul in a place called Logar province. The Taliban commander who invited me to the interview had done 2 previous interviews with foreign journalists. And here was where my ethical lapse comes. I made a selfish decision. 2 months earlier, I had gotten married to Kristen Mulvihill. As I sat that night trying to decide whether I would go to the interview the next morning, I was convinced that I knew best. I was convinced that I would be safe, and I decided not to tell my new wife that I was going to go to a Taliban interview. That decision was wrong. In terms of my values, it was a selfish decision on my part. I did not think through the consequences of my actions on others before acting. On the morning of November 10th, 2008, we drove to a meeting point in Logar province. When we arrived at the meeting point, no one was there. We called the Taliban commander, and he told us to continue driving down the road, and we'd see his men about a mile ahead of us. We continued driving, and we rounded a corner. There was a car blocking the road. 2 Taliban gunmen rushed towards our vehicle, and we stopped. One of them ordered an Afghan driver, Assad Mangal, who was working with me, out of the front seat. The other ordered an Afghan journalist, Tahir Ludin, who was in the front passenger seat, out of the car as well. Both of them got in the back seat with me, and the 2 Taliban men got in the front seat and began driving the car down the highway. A second car appeared immediately with more Taliban gunmen, and to my amazement, that was it. In a matter of seconds, we had been abducted, and that was the beginning of our 7 months and 10 days in captivity. Some of our guards took classes from foreign militants on how to make roadside bombs that kill Afghan and American soldiers. The videos offered insights into a little understood group that moderate Afghans in the U.S. have been fighting since 2001. To me, the videos glorified a culture of death. My guards whispered, "God is great," each time a suicide bomber perished. The videos the guards seemed to like most showed suicide bombers preparing themselves for attacks and sacrificing their lives with great pride. My guards revered suicide bombers the way a young American might idolize a sports hero or movie star. One day I met a young boy who was going to a Taliban-run school. I would guess he was about 10 years old. I asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. His first answer was, "I want to be a suicide bomber." I told him, "Let's say there's peace in Afghanistan and Pakistan. You can be anything you want. What's your second choice?" And he said he wanted to be a mujahideen, or a holy warrior. I said, come on. There's peace. You can be anything you want. What's your third choice?" And he said, "I want to be a Muslim." That's the type of bigotry that continues to exist today in the tribal areas of Pakistan. On the night of June 19th, my Afghan colleague and I followed a plan we had just come up with that afternoon. It began with me getting up and pretending to go to the bathroom. Instead of waking up with the guards, instead of waking up my guards and asking them for permission to go to the bathroom, I crept out of the room where we slept with the guards and didn't wake them up. I walked to the bathroom and stood there and waited for the guards to emerge. None of them did. My Afghan colleague then emerged from the room as well. And one of the decisions we had made that night to escape seemed to be paying off. The power had come back on in the town that night, and the ceiling fan and the cooler, it's a very crude air conditioner, was working. The noise from the ceiling fan was drowning out our movements. After he made it out of the room and our guards didn't wake up, we walked over to a shelf where I had found a car tow rope when we moved into the house 2 weeks earlier. We then crept up onto the roof of the house, tied it to the wall, and threw the rope over the wall. My Afghan colleague looked over the wall and said the rope wasn't long enough. I looked over myself and couldn't tell, and we weren't sure what to do. Eventually, I got down on all fours, and he stood on my back, and he went over the wall himself. When I stood up, I realized that he'd been so nervous that he'd forgotten to take his sandals. I picked up his sandals, jammed them in my pants, and then climbed over the wall myself. When I landed on the other side, I was standing in a sewage ditch, and I looked up, and my Afghan colleague Tahir was walking down the street in front of our house as fast as he could in his bare feet. I followed him, and we walked out into a riverbed. I had no idea where we were going. I was completely dependent on my Afghan colleague. You do have that courage. I mean, people, we all have that courage. When we're all pushed, we show it, and I would start small. I covered school boards in suburban Philadelphia when I was in my 20s. Actually, my very first job in journalism, we were talking about this earlier today, I was a secretary at ABC News. I did a couple unpaid internships. One was at ABC News Nightline. And I had no job when I graduated from college. I felt like a complete failure. Then I was a secretary, and I literally picked up my boss's dry cleaning. I deposited his paycheck, and I helped his 7th grade son do book reports in the ABC News Research Library. And I felt like a coward and a failure. And then I went and covered school boards in suburban Philadelphia, and it was boring. And my mom was like, "Why are you leaving ABC to go to the Philadelphia Inquirer?" Start small. Frank started small, and then he got bolder and bolder. And Frank started from right here. I forgot to say this earlier. When Frank graduated as a journalism major, there were 9 students who majored in journalism, and it's a credit to this university and to Jerry and everybody else that today there are roughly 700 students majoring in journalism. There are things to expose in Nevada, in your hometowns. I would just say, start small. Don't put pressure on yourself. But you do have that courage. You do. And I didn't even do any of this intentionally. It was a big giant mess, and I'm lucky. We escaped from it. I'm not brave. I wish this had never happened. I wish my family had never gone through this. So, just believe in yourself, and things will work out in ways you don't expect it to.